Welcome to this energy transfer facility. The orientation you are about to view is required for all visitors and contractors providing services at energy transfer facilities. The purpose of the visitor and contractor safety orientation is to provide a summary of the company's safety expectations. It does not certify or train visitors or contractor employees on any subject. It only provides the necessary hazard communication and general overview to help you ensure your safety while at these facilities. Following proper safety guidelines protects our employees, our contractors, our equipment, and the communities in which we are located. Our employees receive regular safety training, and working safely is a vital part of every employee's job. As a visitor or contract employee, safety is your responsibility too, and it's an important part of continuing a successful working relationship. Fulfilling your safety responsibilities requires that you pay close attention to Energy Transfer's safety procedures and the requirements highlighted in this video. This orientation is valid for a maximum of 1 year. An orientation review will be provided if a visitor or contractor employee requests it or appears confused on company procedures. Because each facility and work site is unique, working safely means becoming familiar with the existing safe operating procedures at the facility where you'll be working. The contract between your employer and our company requires you to adhere to all applicable company policies, rules, and regulations, and all local, state, and federal regulations. If guidelines are not followed, work may be immediately stopped, contractors may be removed from our property, and contracts may be terminated. If you witness any violation or disregard for safety policies or procedures while on our property, you should immediately notify your supervisor and the company representative. Before work begins, contractors and all of their representatives are required to meet with a company representative to review the applicable safety requirements for that site. If you have any questions about the safety procedures required for your task, contact your supervisor prior to beginning work. Prevention is the key. Be alert and aware. Stop and report any defective equipment, unsafe conditions, or operations to your supervisor and the company representative immediately. If you are injured in any way on the job, report it to your supervisor immediately. Your supervisor must report all injuries to a company employee. Reporting all injuries ensures that corrective actions or hazardous conditions can be addressed to prevent other incidents. In addition to reporting all injuries, your supervisor must provide adequate first aid and medical supplies on site and make them readily available when needed. Smoking is prohibited except in designated areas. All smoking and lighting materials must be stored in the designated areas. Company policy prohibits contractors and employees to possess or be under the influence of alcohol or illegal drugs when reporting for work, while working, or while on or about company property. If you are involved in an incident or if drug use is suspected, a company representative reserves the right to request a search and/or a drug test. Firearms are not permitted on company property. Violation of this policy may result in immediate eviction from company property, notification to your company management, and possible prosecution. As a visitor or contractor, you may work in areas with potential hazards requiring personal protective equipment. All contractors are required to follow our company's minimum PPE requirements, in addition to your company's requirements. Contractors are required to provide their own PPE. Torn, ragged, or loose-fitting clothing can present hazards on the job and should be avoided. In addition, shorts and sleeveless shirts are not allowed. The provision and handling of disposable clothing is the sole responsibility of your employer. Hard hats, safety glasses with side shields, and safety footwear must be worn at all times, unless you are in an office or inside a vehicle. Safety glasses with side shields, clip-on type is acceptable, are the minimum PPE for the eyes and must be worn by employees, contractors, and visitors at all work sites except in offices, meeting rooms, change rooms, and control rooms. Foot protection, any safety shoes or boots, must have toe protection and be ANSI approved for field work. Some of your work may require the use of respiratory protection. Your supervisor is responsible for helping you select the correct equipment. Under no circumstances should airline respirators be connected to the plant's compressed air system. Proper hearing protection is required in posted areas. Additional PPE requirements may be necessary and will be covered during the site-specific orientation. In addition, you should follow your company's guidelines. The company location at which you'll be working may use and store chemical products. In accordance with OSHA regulations, Energy Transfer maintains material safety data sheets to communicate information regarding health and physical hazards. You have the right to know about any hazardous chemicals to which you may be exposed, and a written program is available to explain the hazard at any location. In addition, if you're planning on bringing any hazardous chemical substances onto company property, then your supervisor must inform the company representative in advance. Contracting companies must supply copies of material safety data sheets and make them available to anyone who may be exposed to any chemicals brought onto company property. You must know where to locate and how to read material safety data sheets for emergency and first aid procedures. You must also be sure that your flammable or hazardous containers are properly labeled. Various warning signs are used in company facilities to alert all personnel of potential hazards. The hazard warnings designated by the signs and barricades must be followed by all contractors and visitors. Physical barricades and colored barricade tapes are used to prevent entrance into work locations where known hazards exist: overhead work, leaks, radiation, excavation, confined space, etc. Signs and labels are provided on chemical storage tanks and containers to identify hazards. Energy transfer facilities may have specific emergency and evacuation procedures. Contractors and visitors must be aware of the potential for emergency situations and respond as directed by local facility management. Included in the local procedures are alarms, evacuation routes, and gathering location. Before work begins at any site, company representatives will meet with contractors to explain the facility's emergency plan. Your supervisor is then responsible for explaining to you the emergency alert system, the location of emergency phone numbers, the escape and evacuation routes, and primary and secondary emergency assembly areas. In the event of an emergency, an alert will be issued. And you must immediately report to the designated emergency assembly area. Work must be stopped until the company job representative directs the contractor to return to work. More information will be given during the site-specific orientation. Your supervisor will also be required to maintain a daily sign-in, sign-out sheet for all contractor employees on site so that everyone can be accounted for in the event of an emergency. Energy Transfer will provide applicable site-specific information to contractors and visitors. The information may include the specific site policies for conducting work, the layout of the facility, emergency notification and evacuation routing, and other specific chemical hazards and process information. If you have any questions or concerns regarding any of this information, please address those issues during this meeting with the local company representative. If after this initial meeting you have any further questions about the safety procedures required for your task, contact your supervisor. This marks the end of General Visitor Orientation. The next segment addresses the specific safety policies and procedures for contractors performing work at our facilities. The information covered in this video may be more or less stringent if performing new construction or greenfield work. Any such information will be covered during a site-specific or job-specific orientation. All contractors and their employees are required to perform their activities in accordance with local, state, and federal standards that are applicable for the work being performed. Contractors are responsible for providing workers that have the proper training and documentation applicable to the job. All contract employees must be trained by the contractor in procedures for the control of hazardous energy, lockout-tagout. Sources of hazardous energy include electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, or stored pressure. All energy sources are isolated and verified in accordance with Energy Transfer's lockout-tagout procedures. The location at which you're working has specific lockout procedures in place that must be followed prior to making any adjustments or repairs on machinery, pressurizing piping, electrical equipment, or moving equipment. Energy Transfer's lockout-tagout program will be used at this facility. This includes the requirement for contractors to place their locks on equipment being worked on. It is required that the contractor lockout program and the host employer lockout program be communicated to both parties. Energy Transfer representatives will properly lock out the equipment before you begin work on company equipment. You should then follow your company's lockout procedures and apply your locks at the appropriate location. The contractors are required to provide their employees with locks, lockout hardware, and tags. The locks must not be used for any purpose other than lockout-tagout. The locks must be under the exclusive control of the contractor employee and identify that employee. Tags include the condition or reason for tagging, the date, the equipment being tagged, the signature of the person applying the tag, and danger, do not operate, or similar warning. Before beginning work, the equipment must be tested to ensure proper lockout. Most importantly, never remove any locks or tags except the ones you have installed. General work and hot work permits are used to establish a clear line of communication between operations and maintenance or contractors, and to establish an understanding of the work being performed and the safety precautions to be followed. This procedure applies at all company-owned and operated facilities, including compressor stations and associated facilities, pipeline ROW right-of-way facilities, treating and processing facilities, and the LNG terminal. Work activities are classified into two basic categories: general work and hot work. The specific scope of the permitted work must be clearly written on the permit. This includes specifying the piece of equipment to be worked on, type of work to be performed, all safety precautions to be taken prior to starting or continued while the work is in progress, identifying other known hazards, and other special instructions pertinent to the job. Energy Transfer operations and contractors are responsible for the proper use of the permit system. Both parties, those specifying the work and those performing the work, are required to follow all safety procedures and the precautions specified on the permit. All work permits are valid until a crew change occurs, the work shift ends, the job ends, whichever occurs first, or an emergency condition arises that immediately cancels the permit. The contractor or employee must sign the permit and post it at the job site. Upon completion, the permit is to be returned to the company representative. A general work permit is required for general or cold work which does not produce a potential source of ignition from flame, spark, or heat. A hot work permit is required for all work activities that produce a potential source of ignition from flame, spark, or heat in a permit-required area, or on or within 40 feet of equipment containing or thought to contain hydrocarbons that have the potential for a leak or release. A hot work permit is also required for all excavations on in-service or isolated, depressurized pipelines where there is evidence of leaking hydrocarbon or chemical. This and other information will be covered in the site-specific portion of your orientation. Additionally, some work may require the use of confined space permits. A confined space is defined as being large enough and so configured that an employee or contractor can bodily enter and perform assigned work, but that has limited or restricted means for entry or exit and is not designated for continuous occupancy. Examples include tanks, vessels, silos, storage bins, vaults, and pits. There is a written confined space program for the site at which you will be working that details the permit-required confined spaces. The permit process notifies others that you'll be working in a confined space and contains a checklist to ensure precautions are taken. This procedure applies to every confined space entry on company sites, regardless of the personnel entering or the purpose for entering the space. Our company representatives are responsible for preparing these spaces for entry. In addition, contractors may work under their own confined space program and must provide their own safety and atmospheric monitoring equipment. Contractors hired to perform work in permit-required confined spaces must submit their confined space entry program for review and approval to the area safety representative prior to performing any work. Employees and contractors are warned of the confined space locations by a sign being posted at the site of the confined space. Shown is an example of the company-recommended sign. Sign posting is required in all practical situations where entry by employees and/or contractors cannot be controlled. You should consult with a company representative to identify and determine if your work will involve a confined space. In your work, you may encounter situations where a fall hazard exists. Fall hazards are defined as any work performed at elevated levels of 6 feet or higher above the ground or work floor. While performing tasks near a fall hazard, OSHA requires all personnel to be protected by guardrails or some form of fall arrest system. This includes work done near the edges of pits or on roof lines or other elevation. Contractors are required to provide their own fall protection equipment, and it must be inspected for defects before you begin work. Situations may occur where a fall hazard exists, but the type of fall protection necessary for use is not readily apparent. These situations are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It is the contractor's responsibility to notify his or her supervisor when encountering these situations. Area management will then determine what resources are necessary to resolve the situation. Contractors are not authorized to operate equipment that is owned or leased by Energy Transfer without specific authorization from our site representative. Examples of equipment that must not be operated by contractors without authorization include mechanized equipment and overhead cranes. All personnel involved in the operation of cranes and rigging must be qualified. All operations must be in accordance with applicable regulations and site procedures. Contractors must identify and mark all overhead power lines that have the potential to be impacted by excavation or lifting equipment. Appropriate clearing distances must be maintained at all times, and a spotter must be utilized when equipment is being moved. All personnel involved in the operation of aerial lifts must be trained, and all operations must be in accordance with applicable regulations and site procedures. A full body harness must be worn and tied off during operation of an aerial lift. A contractor's work may require excavating and backfilling. Excavation and backfilling standards must be followed to prevent the hazards of cave-in or asphyxiation in trenches, under embankments, and in holes. Contractors performing excavation work are required to provide a competent person for the job. During all excavation work, the competent person must be present and must implement an approved excavation inspection checklist. A competent person is defined as one who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards and who has authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. The competent person determines the required sloping and cave-in precautions and makes daily inspections prior to the start of the work shift. The contractor is responsible for supplying cave-in protection and erecting barricades to mark the limits of the work area and to protect personnel from unattended excavation. Before opening any excavation, all required permits must be obtained and the location of underground utilities and piping must be determined. The appropriate local notification system for contacting utilities and other affected parties must be made prior to the start of the activities. All personnel have full authority to stop the work if they determine that the work is being performed unsafely, if a foreign object is spotted, or if the guidelines set out in the excavation procedures are not properly followed. Contractors must be familiar with the nearest emergency safety equipment. This includes fire extinguishers, eye wash stations, first aid kits, and other emergency safety equipment that may be necessary while performing tasks. All equipment must be industrial in design, and contract personnel must be trained on its use. Equipment must be in good condition and operating correctly. No safety guards or devices may be altered or removed. All power cords must be 3-pronged with ground lug. 110-volt or greater power cords must be a minimum of 12 gauge and free of any cuts or abrasions. Power cord connectors must be kept out of standing water. Portable cord and plug-connected equipment shall be inspected prior to use and shall be equipped with a cord that has ground fault protection or is double insulated. Contractors are responsible for the proper storage, transportation, and use of compressed gas cylinders they bring onto the site. All cylinders must be properly labeled. Cylinder valves are to remain closed and protective caps in place when not in use or being transported. A handle or other shut-off device must be in place when the cylinder is opened. All air hoses and air hose connections shall be of the proper type and rated for the specific use. Air hoses shall not be used for other compressed gases or service, such as nitrogen, oxygen, etc. Crow's foot connections shall use safety clips or other similar devices to prevent the air hose from unintentionally disconnecting. Compressed air shall never be used to clean either workers or their clothing. Abrasive blasting will require that the contractor obtain a hot work permit. Prior to conducting any abrasive blasting, any potential hazards associated with that activity will be communicated to the contractor. All work areas must be kept clean after a work task is completed and at the end of the work shift. All tools, power cords, welding leads, and utility hoses are to be picked up and properly stored. All staged supplies are to be stacked out of walkways and in a manner that does not limit facility operations or pose a tripping hazard. All debris is to be swept clean and properly disposed of. No pollutants are to be washed down into drains or sumps. From start to finish, following these policies and procedures will promote a safe working environment for everyone involved. This concludes Energy Transfer's Safety Orientation Program for contractors and visitors. Any questions should be directed to an Energy Transfer representative prior to beginning work. Your complete understanding and compliance with these policies and procedures will help maintain the highest safety standard. If this facility has any additional requirements, then a site representative will conduct a site-specific orientation following this video presentation. At Energy Transfer, the safety of our employees, contractors, and the general public are a key value. Let's all work together to maintain a safe and incident-free workplace.